The 2014 season, in a lot of ways, was supposed to be a bit of a transitional, almost lost season for the organization after their division title and making the playoffs, getting that first round bye in 2013, but coming up short against the 49ers. 2014, you lose your top three wide receivers in the offseason in Steve Smith, Brandon LaFell, and Ted Ginn Jr. This is a team that was in a bit of a quandary in terms of the salary cap. And 2014, in a lot of ways, was going to be that bridge of the gap between 2013 and 2015. And it looked like for a good portion of the 2014 season, with that tough schedule that the Panthers had, that it was going to be a bad year. And it sure looked like it, especially heading into December. You talk about a team that was 3-8-1 at one point in time. However, the Panthers took a lost season and made something out of it. They won their last 4 games of the regular season. They did something nobody else in the history of the NFC South Division has done. That's win the division in back-to-back years. Yeah, they were 7-8-1, but they still won their division. They still made the playoffs, and they won a playoff game. And then were competitive on the road in the playoffs, losing to the Seattle Seahawks, a team that, for a lot of intents and purposes, maybe should have been the repeating Super Bowl champions. So now you're looking at Carolina Panthers team, 2 straight division titles, 2 straight playoff appearances, this time a playoff game win. You're talking about a team that has a lot of momentum heading into 2015, a season that they were being set up to do well in. Now they've got some momentum to go along with that. So now in this offseason, I don't think you can expect a lot of major changes. Again, the Carolina Panthers are trying to get their salary cap under control. They really didn't need to add a whole lot in terms of free agency, and they really didn't. I mean, yeah, they brought in Michael Orr off the scrap heap from the Titans, but that's not exactly breaking the bank. They brought in Peanut Tillman, frankly, off of the scrap heap from the Chicago Bears. But again, another move that's not exactly going to break the bank. In terms of players that they lost, you really don't see where they lost all that much. I mean, yeah, you could sit there and talk about Byron Bell, but again, was he really much of a loss at left tackle? Ask Panther fans, and I think they'll tell you how they feel about him. And then even Greg Hardy, yeah, he left. He's gone. He went to Dallas, but he really wasn't there at all for 2014. And, the Panthers still found a way to make the playoffs. They won a playoff game. So this might be an instance of addition by subtraction, all the while not having to tie a huge cap figure into a guy who only played basically 1 game for you. And then you look at the draft. You can see again where the Carolina Panthers were trying to go for those athletes, the guys like the Shaq Thompsons and the Devin Funchesses. How much they'll contribute right away remains to be seen. But you can see there is some type of vision, there's some type of plan in place for the Carolina Panthers that could potentially bear some major fruits come this 2015 NFL season. Now, in terms of the strengths of this team, I think you got to start off with Cam Newton. And you look at Cam Newton and you say, this is a franchise guy. Is he an elite guy? No, not yet. Will he ever be? I don't know. But he is a franchise NFL quarterback. So from the jump, from Jump Street, the Carolina Panthers have an immediate advantage over at least half of the NFL teams and probably closer to 20 to 23 of them. So when you have one of those type of quarterbacks like the Panthers do in Cam Newton, it's a huge asset and it's a huge benefit. But then you look at the wide receiving core that's built around him. You're talking about a team, like I said, in 2013 had Steve Smith, Brandon LaFell, Ted Ginn Jr., all of those guys gone. And in what they do instead is they retool. Yeah, they've already got Greg Olsen in place at tight end. That's one nice option. They drafted Kelvin Benjamin in the first round last year out of Florida State. He had 1,000 yards receiving as a rookie. That's another option. Then you look at an undrafted player like Philly Brown, a nice type of role player, similar to a Jericho Cotchery, a guy they brought in free agency last year, who, again, a nice possession type of consistent role player. And then you head into the second round and get another similar type of guy to Kelvin Benjamin in a Devin Funchess. Might not be as good, might not be as big and physical, but similar types of receivers out there for a guy like Cam Newton to work with. So not only do you have that guy, but you have some of the weapons around him in the passing game to help him perhaps have his best season through the air out of his 5 years in the National Football League. And then I look at the defensive front seven, too. Any defensive front seven that has Luke Kuechly on it, obviously, it's a big plus. Whatever they might potentially get out of Star Lotulelei at some point in time this year, Quan Short as well. You might question their defensive ends a little bit, but I still think in general, this is a defensive front seven when you throw in a guy like Thomas Davis, and then maybe a Shaq Thompson comes in certain situations, him and A.J. Klein maybe rotate on the one outside position. This is a pretty good defensive front seven. They're solid. They could do a little bit of everything. I like that, and when you're front seven is the strength of your defense, you're in a pretty good place. Now, I do have some concerns about this Panthers team. I'm just not totally ready to crown their asses just yet. I really have concerns about the running game. D'Angelo Williams is gone. You're back again another season putting your hopes on Jonathan Stewart, which is always a dangerous proposition. Sure, you drafted Cameron Artis-Payne out of Auburn in the late portion of the draft, but again, there's not a lot of depth there. And for a team that needs to be able to run the football, I have some concerns about whether or not they'll be able to run the football with the personnel that they have, with the depth that they have. And I really have that concern because of that offensive line. That offensive line is not good. And yes, Byron Bell is gone, thank God. But then you're potentially looking at maybe replacing him with Michael Orr on the blind side. It's one thing if Michael Orr is being portrayed in the movie The Blind Side. It's another thing when you're asking him to block on the blind side at the NFL level. That could potentially spell disaster. And when you look at the Carolina Panthers, by far their biggest need this offseason was to address that offensive line, in particular both tackle positions. And you look at how they did it, or in this particular case, really didn't, both in free agency and in the early portions of the draft. You really have to have concerns about how effective that running game is going to be behind that offensive line. And in particular, you have to wonder how well protected Cam Newton is going to be to where he could be able to throw outside to some of these receivers that can create matchup problems if he can't stay in the pocket, if he can't stay upright, because he's got pressure in his face all the damn time. You look at how bad that offensive line was in 2014, it's not hard to envision that the offensive line could be every bit as bad as that come 2015. And then you look at the safety position. I mean, if you're expecting big minutes out of guys like Roman Harper, you're kind of hurting it in a bad way. And I look at the Panthers and I say, if they had a real playmaking safety back there, this defense could be a whole lot better, and we'd really be talking about this as potentially one of the elite teams in the National Football League. They need somebody to step up at the safety position, but I don't know if that guy is currently on the roster. Now, in terms of players to watch for this team this year, I look at one of their draft picks, Darrell Williams. At some point in time, he's probably going to end up starting at one of the tackle positions, and they need him to. They probably need him to right away. They need him to help fortify the outside of that offensive line, because if they can't protect Cam Newton and they can't do a better job of blocking in the running game, it's not going to matter. It's just not going to matter. And then I look at Jonathan Stewart, too, and I see a guy that was a former first-round pick going back to 2008, taken 13th overall out of Oregon. You realize now this guy's been in the league 8 damn years. All those years of him always time-sharing with D'Angelo Williams, all those years of him always finding a way to get hurt, yet at the same time occasionally teasing you with that big potential. This is a year where the Carolina Panthers need Jonathan Stewart to finally live up to that first-round pick potential that he had going back to 2008 coming out of college. If Jonathan Stewart can provide offensive balance, if Jonathan Stewart can stay healthy for the majority of the season, if Jonathan Stewart can be that between-the-tackles runner that the Panthers need, then it adds another element to the Carolina Panthers offense. They can control the clock, keep their defense off the field. Just so many good things can happen. It can open up things in the passing game on the outside. They really need Jonathan Stewart to show up and stay there in a big-time way. And then I look at last year's second-round pick, Coney Ely. There's no more Greg Hardy. Granted, again, he didn't really play much in 2014, but I don't really think Coney Ely did a whole heck of a lot in 2014 himself. They need Ely to play better. They need him to contribute more. Whether he's flipping inside in pass rush situations, whether he's playing outside at defensive end in run situations, either way, they need to get something out of him. Or else you could see some issues with that Carolina Panthers defensive line in terms of being able to get to the quarterback in 2015. In terms of the Panthers' schedule, I look at 2 blocks of the schedule that I think are pretty important. I look at weeks 1 through 4. And the reason I start off with the first 4 weeks of the season is they have what frankly should be 4 winnable games. They go to Jacksonville, then they host Houston, they host New Orleans, they go to Tampa Bay. Those are 4 games the Carolina Panthers need to win. Those are 4 teams that are not as good as the Carolina Panthers. And if you want to be a team that wins the division again, most importantly of all, perhaps gets a first-round bye and maybe even has thoughts of entertaining home field advantage throughout the NFC playoffs, these are the types of games you have to win. And there'd be nothing better for a Carolina Panthers organization that got off to a horrible start last year than to sit there and do the exact opposite this year and go out of the gates 4-0. I mean, Jacksonville, Houston, New Orleans, Tampa Bay. This isn't the creme de la creme. It's not all the creme de la crap, but they're not very good. And the Panthers need to pounce on this opportunity, and they need to get off to that hot start, especially when you look at their schedule weeks 6 through 9. They've got to go to Seattle, then they host Philly, they host Indianapolis, and they host Green Bay. Whether or not they can win in Seattle remains to be seen, but then you're talking about 3 consecutive games at home early on in the year against 3 teams that a lot of people would expect to make the playoffs, and 2 teams in particular in Indianapolis and Green Bay that a lot of people are going to be picking to go to the Super Bowl. The Carolina Panthers need to be able to handle their business at home, and they need to be able to win all 3 of those home games, especially when you're talking about, from a Packers standpoint, that may be a team that's in the mix for contending for home field advantage or at least a first-round bye in the NFC playoffs. The Panthers need to build up those tiebreakers. They need to get off to as hot of a start as possible. And if you're talking about winning your first 4 games and then coming through that week 6 through 9 stretch and being able to win 3 out of those 4, the Panthers have really done themselves justice, and they've really positioned themselves well for the second half of the season, heading towards a stretch run of the playoffs. Overall, I think this is a pretty good Carolina Panthers team, and their schedule for being a first-place team isn't all that particularly brutal. It really isn't. I mean, they kind of luck out in the sense that they get to play the the AFC South. So that means matchups against the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that most certainly, like I said, doesn't hurt them. It really, really doesn't. And in general, for a team that won the division, their schedule is not as imposing as you might expect. I really, really think this Carolina Panthers team could be headed for big things in 2015. I think if things even go bad, I still think this is a 9, maybe even 10-win football team. I do think, however, based off of their schedule and the way it breaks down and the way the Carolina Panthers are set up, I think this is a team that could just as easily win 12 or 13 games. I really, really do. I would be absolutely surprised if this team didn't make the playoffs. I'd be even more surprised if they didn't win this division. And I'd also be, frankly, kind of surprised, based off of the situation they find themselves in, if they didn't at least get a first-round bye in the NFC playoffs, if not end up with home field advantage throughout.